The Jetsons, 1963, Issue 3. George gets sent up at work because he somehow missed the stop button when he only wanted to be elevated to the coffee break button, so he gets sent through the floor of Mr. Spacely's office. This wouldn't be possible. Not only is his workplace non-OSHA compliant, but you'd think the floor couldn't be broken through. But apparently it's made of the cheapest material ever. His boss gets warned by someone that George has been getting mixed up at lunch somehow, and somehow ended up on an assembly line for gears when on the way to get a drink. How did he even get hired? Somehow he's diagnosed with automatic-itis and given time off work instead of fired by the guy who threatens to fire him every episode. But in this comic, I don't hate him yet. He runs onto the express slidewalk and somehow bumps into someone who calls him out on not looking. But he must have been looking because he has eyes on the front of his head. He wants to hitch a ride to avoid trouble, and his sleeve gets caught on a vehicle driving by because of its sharp fins at the end of it. Why are they designed like that when that's begging for causing more trouble in car accidents? I finally see Rosie, who calls George Daddy for no reason in this story. Jane thanks her and presses a button causing robot hands to put on lipstick for her and brush her hair, which she didn't feel like doing until now, even though she shows no indication so far that she has anything to actually do all day, because she's lazy. Elroy tells her to hurry up and get fixed, even though she's not doing anything. George trips and falls out of the vacuum tube somehow. His family feels bad for him. He explains himself and scares his family by offering to take them camping in the park, even though they were happy to go on a picnic where they'd be doing the same thing. They hate this idea because it'd be leaving behind their modern conveniences. George is probably too embarrassed to tell them he has automatic-itis. He presses a button to send out a flying air purifier by accident because it was behind him. And out of nowhere, it turns out his family was uncharacteristically just kidding. They all had the idea to do this at the same time, so they must have rehearsed this. And they actually just watched a film of that park on TV. So George says he'll rent a space trailer. I don't know why they keep saying space. They don't have air bubbles like astronaut helmets on them, so they can't be in space for most of the series. He's surprised to see that the park has a glass dome over it, so this must be rare for parks. But only he questions it. Sometimes he comes off like he has amnesia and needs reintroducing to the way the future is. Fry from Futurama is better than him because he has an excuse for being ignorant, and is relatable by being from our century. He kinda looks like a younger George with the same hair color. The dome is there for air conditioning and keeping the mosquitoes out. George thankfully has the sense to be fine with this. He says in the parking lot that he always wanted to see what geysers and waterfalls look like. And nobody in his family comments on this to imply that they're any different. Nobody predicted the internet back then. They definitely have it. But even without it, they could have seen it in books, at school. This is the case because Earth is too industrialized in the future, totally ignoring the fact that a lot of people want to preserve nature and have the power to do so. So this couldn't possibly happen. But speaking of nature, there's grass right below him. George doesn't appreciate the bumpy slidewalk existing because he wanted to be away from machines because of his automatic-itis. Jane stays optimistic. If this is normal for her, then I know she's my favorite sitcom wife. I feel like I haven't seen a character be this optimistic in a long time. Then it turns out the geyser is button controlled, because it'd be a waste to let it blast off just any old time with no one to see it. So it is responsible to save on water that way. And what are the chances they would actually have a geyser like Old Faithful? George finds out that the falls are controlled to conserve water too, and he finds a reason to be mad at this too. I know he wants to be back to actual nature, and this defeats the point, but it's not inconveniencing him, and it's good to conserve water. And more importantly, this behavior would be more believable if it could have been someone from the 20th century, because then we'd instantly know he wouldn't be used to any of this. He wants to go mountain climbing, his family stays behind, and mountain climbing gets ruined too because he's brought upwards by someone near a lever. It misses the point of even trying to go mountain climbing, but he has a point that it won't have him get tired or too hurt. Maybe they add a lot of lawsuits, so they think they have to do this. He naturally wonders how a guy could have any fun around here, by sightseeing and then reading a book. If only he was warned about how the park would be, he could have had one. He gets told not to walk on some techno-babble stuff, and he says casually that he's on grass. So in that Flintstones crossover he had, where he said he read about grass in ancient history after Elroy didn't recognize it, that was completely ridiculous. And I'm not even just thinking about this comic. I could have sworn I saw grass near him a few times in the show and he never cared about it. So there's still grass at least. The grass is synthetic because it far outlasts the real thing. So I totally get it. This place might sort of miss the point of a park, but it's full of intelligent, believable decisions. And I get that its appeal is supposed to be that it looks like a park, in some ways. The Jetsons is definitely better than Futurama. You won't think it because it's old, and isn't as memorable and engaging. But this gets you to realize that you should look forward to the future, while Futurama keeps you hopeless about it. George doesn't like that even the forest smells fake, and there's a good excuse for why the trees are made of aluminum. There's no rot, forest fire, or rust, so it's safe. He looks forward to a campfire meal, but realizes that he can't build a campfire here, unless that material gets provided to him for the proper experience. But instead of the park people having common sense, they don't do that. Maybe they're just too paranoid of a fire starting. His family's fine with ordering food pills at a table, and George doesn't have an appetite. He lands on a tree and touches an electrical outlet that shouldn't be in a tree where anyone could reach it. So because it was put in an impossibly irresponsible place, after Jane tells him he should know better when he obviously didn't see it, it turns out a main fuse is blown and the park's air conditioner stopped working. Just because of that, an announcement tells everyone to leave the park through an exit tube. I'm really glad George didn't get in trouble for this. George is happy to leave, and a ranger brings them hot dogs, which Elroy loves. So he sure was optimistic to still be smiling about ordering food pills. The ranger must be crazy thinking he should apologize for giving them hot dogs instead of food pills and seeing them as crude emergency rations. It would be the other way around. George gets thrown a little tent. All he has to do, according to the instructions he somehow has to read, is pull a cord. And a charge of compressed gas would fully inflate this ancient tent of 1995. Predictably, his family ends up appreciating the real forest too, because the series isn't too dark for its own good, and instead has a tone I can trust. So Judy thinks the air is full of interesting aromas. I just realized, the show would have you believe this kind of place doesn't exist on Earth and it's only towers in the sky, a bleak concept we wouldn't look forward to, which flies in the face of the series' point. By having a real forest in the Jetsons, even if it's blue like it's made of alien plants, the comic's doing much needed world building to make the future believable and nicer. So it's sad that most people missed out on that. At least I assume, because nobody ever talks about the Jetsons comics. George tells his family to hurry and follow him before they sound an all clear and herd them back into the fake park. The story ends with George being happy that the bears out here are just robots that have coffee mugs. In the next story, Elroy gets worried about Astro because he's been napping lately. A few issues ago, he was also faced with this problem. How's it only lately? Well, I guess he wasn't napping just because he played with them all day. But he was smiling, so it didn't create that impression. Astro's sitting in a doghouse that has separate buttons for a ball, bone, and shoe, and has a fake cat attached to a part of it. I'm describing all this technology stuff because I find it so interesting, even if anyone can see it. And you never know when it'll actually matter to the plot instead of just being visual as usual. Astro just naps and ignores Elroy's desperate button pressing. Because he isn't excited by food, Elroy assumes he's sick when he should know he's always been lazy, and insists on taking him to the vet by himself. Boy, there sure are free-range children in the future. People got way less paranoid. If Elroy was actually famous for being an inventor, you'd think every stranger would say, "It's Elroy Jetson," and not leave him alone. Elroy goes to the vet's building without a pet because of course Astro didn't bother to follow him. The building has buttons for the doctor for heat, cold, bath, food, water, music, and temperature for some reason. The doctor tells him to just describe Astro's symptoms to him, and he plans on looking at Astro through a viewer. Then why would he even need him to describe the symptoms if the viewer can determine them? Miraculously, it turns out Elroy wasn't just jumping to conclusions from forgetting that Astro has been lazy before, and instead just needs to have his automatic doghouse disconnected for a few days, because those things do too much for a dog. Elroy's acting like this was the first time this ever happened to him. This would only make sense if this was a flashback in time to when he was still getting used to Astro, or the automatic doghouse is something he just got. Elroy takes the risk of going to the power room on his own to unplug the doghouse when he's a kid. He tells Astro to rejoice because he's here to take the place of his automatic way of life. He throws a ball, and miraculously, Astro's happy with him. Then at night, he immediately goes back and misses his old life. I definitely prefer the comic's unfaithful direction with him, where it's firmly established he can't talk, and instead he's barking but a second text box translates. So now we know why those kids thought there was nothing special about him. This makes much more realistic sense. Now I don't hate him as much anymore, because he still talks normally instead of like Scooby-Doo for no reason. His problem is that he can't sleep because he's alone. So he abandons logic and goes over to Elroy's bed despite being too big, and then when his weight tilts the bed, an alarm goes off, and Elroy gets sent out of the bed. Why on earth did the bed float anyways? Granted, people do get lulled to sleep much easier by hammocks, so the bed floats to be kind of like a hammock. It's confusing because it'd take up electricity unnecessarily. If Astro knows there's a load limit on beds, he had no excuse for doing this. Oh good, Elroy says that he gets it now, and Astro needs to be plugged in for the night. So he did what he knew was a mistake to get Elroy to plug everything back in. The heat, back scratcher, and mech cat. So he missed the mech cat. Then it turns out the mech cat is biting a burglar, whose hand lands on the other buttons, getting stuff thrown at him. No wonder people waste money on dog houses like this, when dogs would clearly be perfectly happy without them, and can't whine at them to buy them. Oh, what a coincidence, it's not just a burglar, but a much wanted burglar. Elroy gives the doghouse the credit for the burglar's capture, but still complains that's a problem because it takes the place of him as Astro's master, apparently. George decides to trade the thing in on someone else at the automatic market. How would that keep Astro from getting lonely and going to his bedroom? It's kinda ironic that he would do this after the doghouse just saved him. Elroy suggests a heavy-duty bed so that Astro could sleep on the foot of it. Why didn't he have one to begin with? Then George asks about a watchdog for outside after what just happened, and Elroy says that if they look around, they might see something to take the place of a watchdog. And the story ends with there being a private policeman thing connected to the tube leading to the Jetsons' apartment. But it obviously sucks because he doesn't have legs, so any burglar could see that he's not a real living, breathing policeman. In the next story, Judy refuses to go to the fly-in theater with her current boyfriend in his father's car because she'd rather be alone with him for once on the scooter. Why should I care? He's unhappy that he had to disappoint the couples that wanted to go with them in the station wagon. He says that everyone's going on their cycles now and they'll all park together. So Judy suggests going on a picnic on the moon. So he turns on the super rocket. I wonder why they survived the vacuum of space without spacesuits. It could so easily be explained away that the scooter creates an invisible force field around it, trapping the breathable air inside that lets the carbon dioxide out. But instead insults our intelligence. They find it unusual that there's no attendant at the picnic lunch stand, and them going to the moon is justified because it's why they had to deal with an alien. For once, a Jetson character has to deal with an extraterrestrial that actually looks like one. So him being a generic evil alien is a wasted opportunity. He's using a machine to illegally dig up moon dust. They get tied up by the robot hand of his spacemobile so they won't snitch. Elroy reveals out of nowhere that he stowed away on their date in the glove compartment to watch the movie with them. This feels like a Deus Ex Machina, because I don't remember this being the case all the time. Apparently the compartment was soundproof if you didn't hear all of this commotion. He isn't afraid of the alien because he conveniently had a slingshot with him for no reason and used it to destroy the spacemobile window with a mere rock, somehow, releasing the gas from it. The alien says he can't breathe without it. So if the writer knew there wasn't any air on the moon, how did he forget there wouldn't be air for humans? Which should have always been obvious throughout human history because there aren't any plants completely covering the moon's surface. The alien wants to go home while holding his breath. It's instantly obvious that he wouldn't make it home in time. But Elroy just says he deserves it. That seems unusual of him. At least it's better than a main character being stupid for pitying one of the bad guys too much. He unties Judy, who's so affected by this incredibly unlikely experience that she's cured of wanting to be alone with him and looks forward to being in his dad's station wagon. And the story ends with Judy bringing Elroy along, because she thinks she'll never feel safe without him again. That's surprisingly dark. Good thing there's no continuity, and their inconsiderate boyfriend gets karma because he hates this. In the next story, George envies a guy at work called Maxwell for having a nice parking space and salary. He complains about multi-level parking, which involves a bunch of other spacemobiles parking on top of the one below it, which would clearly damage the one below it from the weight crushing it, unless it was just that well made. There'd have to be a legal limit on how many spacemobiles are allowed to be on top of the one on the floor, or the combined weight would result in damage eventually. This would only make sense if they were hovering above each other just a little bit. George says he's gonna do something to improve his life today because he's impulsive and desperate. After he complains to his boss naturally says he'll have to earn what he's demanding to get. It's a reasonable response. And to be fair, this guy's life sucks, so he has every reason to be a hothead. It's amusing that he can have robot hands hit the table in front of him when he does it. It's funny just how much frivolous technology people can afford. Echidna Polis would have been much more interesting if it had stuff like this. So it looks like its permanent ban on luxury technology did nothing but harm how enjoyable it was, when it could have been just a brief part of its past history and still had its benefit of being interesting. George admits that he can't complain with such a simple job, and Maxwell, who looks annoyingly similar to him, again, at least tries to tell him how he's more successful, because he gives the boss great ideas from the suggestion, which are unintelligible technobabble. Mr. Spacely says he'll pay him for the good idea. I feel like this is unrealistically generous for a boss. He wonders what George is doing away from his workstation, and then his audio trails off. George freaks out, saying that if he's not right on the button all the time, the power fades fast from the whole factory. A time skip happens and it's all fine. You'd think they could have automated his job. But again, that must be illegal for employment rate's sake. He wonders if he could build a better robot. He'd only think this was possible if he knew about robotics. He does know how to make his spacemobile start, so he's already a car mechanic. It's just that all of his intelligence is in electronics. He sees a conveniently dropped formula from the experimental lab. He wonders why the synthetic cloud formula got thrown away, and he should have taken the hint because there's a note on it saying to not waste time on it anymore. But instead he's so desperate, he takes it as a sign, when clearly the people whose jobs it is to work in the lab would know better than the guy who needs to stay at his workstation or the whole factory will shut off. And yet he's casual about abandoning it again. He wants to develop the formula into something that'll sell somehow. To think, all of this could have been prevented if Spacely gave him a raise, even by $1. He makes a cloud in his house in front of Jane. Naturally they get inconvenienced by it, but he makes a comfortable chair out of it, so it only looks like a cloud. Jane gets an idea that they could design new furniture and arrangements with it every day. But it's obvious that they could only have that furniture be one color, which limits its appeal. I guess there's going to be something wrong. They get thirsty, and George fills the pitcher with tap water. The water vanishes not just there, but also in the tub, and a cop bursts into the house and says they're flooding the folks downstairs because the cloud's raining from the moisture it absorbed. He decides to call the boss and have them send out a scientist of his. We see the scientists vacuum up the cloud and tell him off. He finally admits he was cheating by trying to capitalize on someone's invention, and admits that he's gonna get ahead strictly on his own from now on. And the next day, the story ends with him telling his boss that he's come up with a method for taking a break without stopping work. As he uses a long stick with a glove on the end to press a button while he drinks from the fountain, reminding me of the finger longer. I'm kinda proud of him for keeping his word, that the series wants him to be sort of respectable. But considering that's even possible for him to miss and press a wrong button in this series, I still don't trust his intelligence. But it's nice that he got a raise and was made the top man in the parking lot pile. Still, I have no reason to have faith in that to last even a few days. Good thing there's no continuity, so I won't have to be told how he got that privilege revoked. But I wouldn't mind if there was continuity to keep the positive changes. George's story was about George somehow getting time off work because of automatic-itis. Somehow. From impossible mistakes with button presses. And he gets disillusioned by a fascinating artificial park. Tales would love this world. I wish the next Sonic comic could have a setting like this. But George isn't unlikable for not liking the technology, because you understand where he's coming from, rather than him just hating it because it's technology. And eventually there's the predictable part of the story where his family gets to enjoy a real forest. Elroy finds out that the automatic doghouse made Astro lazy and he needs to unplug it. But he gets lonely because of that and wakes him up, causing him to plug it back in. And the Mecha Cat foils a burglar somehow dumb enough to go near the doghouse. Once again, it's an especially interesting story because it hinges on the technology of this world. Too bad it wouldn't fully count as world building if the technology gets dropped by the comic, for no reason. I hope this wouldn't be standard, because stuff like doghouses and whatever's inside the house would have no excuse for not being in more than one issue, since we see the setting so often. Judy's story was about Judy dealing with a boyfriend who wants to have dates with some other couples accompanying them, not explaining it for some reason, by telling him to have a picnic with her alone instead. Maybe he felt more comfortable not being alone with her because it was too much pressure. But he never gets to explain why and actually communicate. Somehow they survive going to the moon without spacesuits and get tied up by an alien who never explains why he wants moon dust so badly. But Elroy the Deus Ex Machina stowed away in the scooter's glove compartment to watch a movie with them, when he never does that. And somehow kept a slingshot with him whose rock somehow destroys the spacemobile's window, which they should know would doom the alien to suffocation. But everyone's fine with it, and Judy's so traumatized from being tied up for a few seconds that she insists on double dating with Elroy along. At least the story was creative, having an enemy that takes advantage of the sci-fi world, even if it's missed opportunity that the sentient alien for once is evil. But I can't get over the fact that they didn't need an air bubble around the scooter to survive going to the moon. It's the future. I wouldn't have blinked if the alien was on Earth instead. The final story was about George wanting to capitalize off someone's discarded invention of synthetic cloud, even though there was actually a note on it from his boss saying not to waste any time on it. So it's another idiot's plot. But to be fair, it was interesting to see, and being desperate for money is a completely believable excuse for a stupid decision, so it's not an idiot ball. It's believable that someone greedy could be desperate enough to convince himself he could get the invention to be profitable, and not the scientist. Because he took the fact that he found the formula as a sign, and he has an ego. He was lucky he even found the formula. He had no reason to. But at least he tries to make up for the stupidity by having him not only prove that he knows about robotics because he thinks he even could make a robot, so he's that and a car mechanic. And he's definitely a genius because he proceeds to invent something at the end of the story.